Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the KLNS Rugby Podcast. Back by myself this time. It's a solo effort as we look ahead to preview the upcoming United Rugby Championship quarterfinals. After an all-time great season, there's just 8 teams remaining. Reigning champions Munster, the Vodacom Bulls, Leinster, Glasgow Warriors, champions of 2 years ago, the DHL Stormers, Ulster, Benetton, and the Ospreys. Will Munster reclaim their crown? Will Leinster avenge their anguish? Or will the title return to South Africa? Or will a rank outsider get the job done? The fun starts now over the next 3 weeks here on the KLNS Rugby Podcast. We will be looking ahead to all of the URC, all the remaining URC rounds, quarterfinals, semifinals, and final with a distinct Irish eye on things, as you can imagine. And for today, we are going to get started with the quarterfinals. We are going to leave the Munster game to the end of that game. As this comes out, it's on tonight, so I'm aware people maybe listen to this on Saturday, for instance. So we will start with, well, firstly, the fixtures. As I said, Munster opening up proceedings, their first seed, they're in that first quarterfinal against the Ospreys. That's at 7:35 on RTE, Premier Sports, or wherever you get your URC coverage. That's at 7:35 in Thomond Park. On Saturday, we have the Vodacom Bulls hosting Benetton in Pretoria. The Bulls, of course, finishing second, courtesy of that bonus point win over the Sharks in round 18. Also on Saturday, we have the Interpro in the Aviva Stadium. Leinster against Ulster. That promises to be a mouth-watering affair. That's at 5 p.m. on GGR, Premier Sports, and wherever you get your coverage. And finally, rounding things off, the Glasgow Warriors against the THL Stormers in Scotstoun, 7:35 p.m. on Saturday night. Another one that promises to be a cracker. But as I said, we will start in the Aviva Stadium. I'm going to try and run through these as quickly as we can because, look, it's an Interbro. It's a big one. Most of our audience is going to be hooked to watching this. It promises to be an absolute belter. Ulster in great form. Leinster not in as good a form, but probably the best team on paper in this competition. Even if they haven't got the job done just yet, it promises to be really, really, really interesting. Leinster didn't finish top for the first time in the URC era. They finished third. Ulster, they ended up in sixth place, courtesy of that losing bonus point in Thomond Park last weekend. So they meet in the Aviva, and there's been so much consternation, so much questioning about these two sides. I think it promises to be one filled with narrative, I suppose, no matter what way it goes. If Ulster can do it, so much questions will be asked of Leinster and their ability to see it out in the big games. If Leinster get the job done, there'll probably be some small questioning of Ulster depending on how that goes. But Leinster, definitely the pressure is on them. No doubt about that. Going to start with the home side, with Leinster. Now, I am recording this on Thursday night before the teams have been named. We'll try not to get too much into that because obviously Leo Cullen and other coaches could pull the wool from under my eyes and select a very different team to what we are expecting. And I think for me, the main point in this is the main talking point around Leinster is just how much they need to win. And it can sound like such a blasé and just unnecessary turn of phrase, but can Leinster really afford to go 3 seasons trophyless, considering they were in three Champions Cup finals? They can definitely afford to, but it certainly adds a weight of pressure. And rising to that expectation is what they're going to need to show here in this one as well. For most of their team, should they be lined out as expected, it'll be their first game since that extra time loss to Toulouse in the Champions Cup final. And yeah, there is pressure. There's no other way of putting it. There is pressure to perform, to get the win, and to go on to maybe Pretoria, maybe back to the Aviva in a week's time and pull off a big result. Do I think Leinster will win? We'll get into that in a few minutes, but I think that pressure is how do I put it? I think it's kind of, it can be a crutch, but it can also be a massive enabler as well at the same time. Like Leinster haven't been under this much pressure in the league possibly ever. Maybe back when they had that mini rivalry with the Ospreys, for instance, kind of in their, say, 2009 to 2013 phase in the league. maybe that was when the last time they were under this much pressure. But I think there's there's a pressure now that they must get to a final. They must win it. They must get that monkey off their back again, because eventually, like, losing becomes a habit just as much as winning does. And this team is well able to win. They're well able to get the job done, and they'll feel like they should be able to get the job done. But they're taking on an Ulster side that have nothing to lose. They've qualified for the Champions Cup. They've made their way into the last eight. And top six got them Champions Cup, and last eight gets them playoff rugby. And they're in good form. And I think under Richie Murphy, they're a new lease of life. I know Johnny McCormick of Opta was on he was on the Red Hand podcast this week talking about how Ulster stats line up to pre-Dan McFarland and post-Dan McFarland, and it certainly seems like that, pressure valve has just been released, and Ulster are playing with a bit more freedom and a bit more life and a bit more explosivity. And there's probably no better man or no better men to highlight this than the likes of Harry Sheridan and Cormac Izuchukwu, who've been brilliant in recent weeks. Is that enough to beat Leinster? It's not. Like, that's the other side of it. Yes, they beat Leinster in Ravenhill a couple of weeks ago. Very different Leinster side than what's up now. They beat them in the RDS on New Year's Day. Again, very different Leinster side to what's up now. I think it was Sam Prendergast at 10 that day, if I remember correctly. So, yes, they've got those wins, but a very different Leinster team, a very rotated Leinster team in those games. This is going to be probably full strength. You'd imagine that the likes of Andrew Porter, Tyke Furlong, Joe McCarthy, Caelan Doris, James Gibson Park, Robbie Henshaw all come back in. James Lowe probably comes back in. And they're your difference makers. They're the guys who raise the level and raise the floor of a team as well. And like Leinster, they've got good depth, arguably not as good a depth as what they used to have, but that's okay. That's just natural in this kind of post-COVID financials world that rugby finds itself in. But they're certainly in a position where they do need someone like Jameson Gibson Park on the field for as many minutes of as many games as possible, and especially in these cup rugby games. And for Ulster, I don't know how they combat that. If Leinster hit the right note and hit the right gear, take, say, for instance, the La Rochelle game in the quarterfinal in the Aviva in the same stadium, arguably Leinster's best performance of the year. Granted, they had that fall off in the last 20 minutes. They shut up shop, but probably Leinster's best performance of the year. Can Ulster live with that? I'm not sure if they can, But at the same time, whereas pressure can be a crutch or an enabler for Leinster, the lack of it for Ulster is very, very freeing. We've seen it last week. They'd no Stuart McCluskey, they'd no Ethan McElroy, they'd no James Hume, they'd no Ian Henderson. Kieran Treadwell went off early. Alan O'Connor went off early as well. And they just looked so free, in a way that they never did under Dan McFarland. They looked overcoached. They looked like they weren't enjoying their rugby. I think Richie Murphy's come in there and just by virtue of being a fresh voice has changed that entire dynamic, which I think is, again, interesting. Because it'll be interesting how long that goes on. Will his tactics hold up over an extended period? There's not a lot of film to base Ulster off. Leinster probably have the benefit of having that, and the fact that they played them not too long ago. I think from that narrative standpoint, it's really enthralling. How will it go? Will Leinster rise to the occasion? Will Leinster put in a big performance? Will Ulster put in a big performance and just keep a rattle on Leinster's cage, like they kind of did to Munster last week, and like they've done to a lot of teams in recent weeks, where they had a good run of form. In terms of how I see it going, though, I do think Leinster will win, and I'll get on to predictions at the very end. I'll have them all there in full. I think Leinster will win, but I don't think Leinster will win this easily. I just don't see it. I think Ulster will relish the chance to be disruptors like they did in Thomond Park. I think they'll relish the chance that they have a free hit where there's nothing to play for. And yeah, they're going to say, as Richie Murphy said last week in front of me in the post-match press conference, like their aim is on this Leinster game. It's not on Champions Cup next year. It's not on pre-season. It's not on next season. It's on this weekend against Leinster in the Aviva Stadium. And it's not going to be easy. Don't get me wrong. I think Ulster without Ian Henderson in particular are always a very different team. Ulster without James Hume are a different team. And that, for me, is the key matchup in this one. It's going to be Leinster's attack versus Ulster's defence, especially in that three-quarters channel. Leinster's attack in the Heineken Cup final was pretty anonymous. Jameson Gibson Park tried to get the game going, kind of struggled against a very tenacious Toulouse defence. And, with the exception of maybe Robbie Henshaw, a few nice touches, nothing really got going in that midfield. On the flip side, for Ulster, their defence on transition last week against Munster was shaky. Will Addison has been in great form in recent weeks, probably didn't have his best game last time around. Jude Postlethwaite, very, very young, certainly struggled in that second half when Joey Carberry went to 10, Jack Hartley went to 12. And yes, Stuart McCluskey is expected to come back in and he is huge for them. But that 13 channel, can Will Addison be a shutdown 13 in the same way that James Hume has been for 4 or 5 years now? He definitely can, but he needs to have a big performance. And you do hope on a personal level, because it's Will Addison and because he's been through a lot at Ulster, he does have a big performance in his closing weeks there. But it's interesting. Like, will Leinster show a full attacking performance? A full attacking performance that we haven't really seen this season. I think their attack on first phase is still really, really good. But in multi-phase play, I'd probably have it above Connacht's. I think Connacht's has been poor, but it's behind Ulster's and behind Munster's, which isn't something you'd usually say about a team of Leinster's quality. And because of that, I'm really interested to see who Leinster go with at fullback. Personally, I go with Jimmy O'Brien. I think Kieran Frawley at fullback is a decent distributor, not a fantastic ball carrier, probably a better tight ball carrier than, say, O'Brien. But in terms of a wide attacking threat, he doesn't really offer that. O'Brien is closer to the Keenan mold in terms of his running style. Got a decent boot, good defender. But I think what he can add to their attacking shape is much better than what Kieran Frawley could add. And this is an attacking shape that, it's not like Leinster have no one to pass the ball. Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose, they're not pass first centres, but they're more than good enough. The issue isn't that Leinster just can't get the ball out there by a skill set. The issue is that Leinster are struggling to break teams down efficiently when they get into those outside channels. And we've seen Robbie Henshaw have a couple of cuts off Toulouse from the 13 jersey in the Heineken Cup final. I keep calling Heineken Cup, Champions Cup final. And he's good at that. If Gary Ringrose comes back in, you'd imagine he's going to be a little bit sluggish. You'd imagine he's not going to hit the ground running entirely, because that's only natural. So how will he set up? So that's why I think if you go with Jimmy O'Brien, I think we've seen he has that spark. He just has that something different that I don't think Leinster have in that back line. Like Jameson Gibson Park, high tempo, high speed of play from the base, decent passing, keeps defenses guessing. And when mixed with the likes of Joe McCarthy and Kayla Doris and Tyke Furlong as your tight carriers around him, unbelievable weapon. Ross Byrne is Ross Byrne, and that's kind of the line that's been used for the last 2 weeks, which I feel like is really harsh. I feel like people looked at Ross Byrne in the Champions Cup final, and just because it's Leinster, they expected, I don't know, Johnny Sexton to come out or Carlos Spencer to come out or something. He didn't. It was Ross Byrne. Ross Byrne had a Ross Byrne game, probably a few more errors than he'd usually have, but that's okay. That's nerves. I think the reaction to his performance has been diabolical. Like, I don't know what people were expecting. He certainly didn't lose them that game and nowhere close to it. In the same way, I don't think Kieran Frawley was going to go and win it for them. Neither would say Sam Prendergast or Harry Byrne. 12 and 13, if it's Osborne and Henshaw, probably carry first, but they're very good defenders. Will probably hit up, not tramline runners, but they're strike runners. In the centre, very direct, very good at that. Good kicking games, good defensive games, as I've said. If it's Gary Ringrose, you'd imagine Henshaw push into 12, Ringrose to 13. Ringrose, there's probably a bit of an anomaly. I think some people overstate how good he is in attack. Some people understate how good he is in attack. He mightn't have the greatest passing numbers or the greatest running meters. He's proficient. Is he a spark? Not by World Rugby standards, but he's a very, very good player in any system. Leinster system no different, and I think Leinster system could get him back, but he's not going to be 100% if he does feature. James Lowe probably losing a step of pace, but acknowledging it, which is a good sign. Like they're not, he's stepped up into the power winger mold, which I'm really, really enjoying. And then personally, I go with Jimmy O'Brien. You know, as I said earlier, the issue isn't how many hands on the ball Leinster are getting, even though you could break it down and look at their, pass per kick ratio and things like that, or pass per phase, pass per ruck ratio. I think the issue is just when they do get to those channels, they don't know where they're going. And I think O'Brien from 15 reads the game better than Frawley does from 15. So with Hugo Keenan out, that's the way I'd be going. Will Ulster be able to deal with them? I'm not sure. And I think coupled with the fact that can Ulster deal with Leinster up front, they're going to really struggle. Just causing havoc of the breakdown is not enough with Leinster. You have to be able to stop them when they get to those channels, like Northampton did in the second half in Croke Park, like Toulouse did over 100 minutes in the Champions Cup final, but not what La Rochelle did. La Rochelle went all in. We're going to stop them at 1 to 10. That was La Rochelle's game plan. 1 to 10. That's where we're going to stop them. They couldn't do that. There was acres of space for Henshaw, Osborne, Lowe, Larmer, Frawley. All had wonderful games in that quarterfinal. For Ulster, yes, use McCann, use Izuchukwu, use Harry Sheridan as these pilfers, as these disruptors at the breakdown, at the mall, etc. But they have to be smart on D. They have to be really, really accurate on D. I think they need to kick smart. I think Billy Burns needs to test their back three. Jimmy O'Brien is a good fullback. If it's not him, I think Frawley can be got at with the kicking game in terms of his positional sense. Likewise, Larmer, James Lowe, less so. And on the flip side of the kicking game, I think Leinster, if I was them, I kick very heavy. I kick a lot of the time, but I would focus on that transition to attack, counter transition, because I think that is where they can get at Ulster. Again, Will Addison could have a great performance like he's shown in recent weeks. But I think what we've seen was he can be got at. And I think what we've seen from Leinster against Connacht, as dilapidated as Connacht looked in that second half, was that Leinster have the pace and they have the accuracy to cut you open from deep with guys like Jimmy O'Brien as your strike runners. So I find that really, really important. Set piece probably lead towards Ulster at line out, Leinster at scrum. Breakdown, Ulster better at disrupting. Leinster very, very good at keeping the speed of play up. Kicking game probably hasn't been Leinster's strength, but if they do implement it, I'm sure Jacques Nienaber has spent 2 weeks looking to perfect the kicking game even more. I give them the advantage there. Home advantage, Leinster have that. 1 to 23, names on a piece of paper, Leinster have that. But I would struggle to write off Ulster for this one. I think Leinster will win. I think they'll win by a score, maybe low 2 scores, like 10, 12 points. But I think this one will go Leinster's way, but not all their own way. Really, really feel like watch out for how Leinster's attack steps up. What has Andrew Goodman seen in that final that he wants to implement now? Is there going to be selection decisions that changes things? Are they going to try the same thing and focus on execution? Really, really interesting. We will move on because the other high profile game that we have coming up on Saturday, right after the Interpro, is Glasgow Warriors against the DHL Stormers. That one taking place in Scotstoun, as you can see on screen if you're on YouTube, Saturday, 7:35 p.m. in Scotstoun. And yeah, this one for me, again, interesting is a word. Glasgow are absolutely formidable at home and have been for quite some time. But the Stormers, I can't trust them. This time last year, I definitely could. And their first 2 seasons in the URC, they looked like the most complete South African team. This year, less so. They've gone, they're full of spark. They're full of life. They're a great team to watch. Don't get me wrong. But they're just less consistent. And I wonder, will they be able to take their game on the road and have full belief that they can pull this off? I'm not sure they will. I'm not sure they will. But for me, for Glasgow, I look at that Glasgow team and I do think, like, I'm not trying to troll them. I do think it's a very good Glasgow team. I think they can go on a run, and I think they are well within their rights to be one of the top four. They're certainly one of the tournament favorites at this point. I would wager. Now there's the whole thing of, well, they're Scottish and can you trust them? And the same can be said for the Stormers, the same can be said for the Bulls, for most teams in the top eight. But like, you look at them, like Tui Pilotu, Stafford McDowell, Kyle Rowe, Kyle Steen, Josh McKay. That was the outside backline that played against the Lions when they were defeated. That's as good as anywhere you're going to see. Do you know? Like they packed the bench that day then as well with like Fagerson, Dempsey, Dobie, Johnny Matthews, both Fagersons actually. And I do think they've got a really, really good side there. But have they got everything? Have they improved on last year? We've seen last year in Cup rugby situations against Toulon in the Challenge Cup final and against Munster in the URC quarterfinal 2 weeks previous. They didn't look like they were quite at that level. And you almost have to wonder with Glasgow, well, they play Zebra twice and they play Benetton twice. So they get a home game against Benetton and they get a home and away game against Zebra in their fixture list. And like, don't get me wrong, Benetton are a decent team and they're in the top eight and they're good. But how many points have you been gifted there? Are you being gifted 8 points? Is that the difference between getting top four and not getting top four? What would Glasgow be like if they had to play in the South African conference or in the Irish conference or Shield or whatever? I'm not sure where I stand on them. And the same can be said for the Stormers. Are they as good as last year? I don't think they are. I don't know if Glasgow are as good as they were last year. In terms of putting all their parts together. Anything I've seen them has been hit and miss. Granted, they played three of the provinces, if not four of the provinces in the front part of the season. So they've kind of missed a lot of their games in the back half. But like, I just look at that Glasgow backline. Kyle Steen, good player. Like really good player. Kyle Rowe, good player. Tui Piloto and McDowell. I think McDowell is really decent. I think he's really tidy. Tui Piloto can definitely be got at. I think he fades in and out of games too much for a guy who's your main guy. I think the likes of Jack Dempsey, Matt Fagerson, they've a good team there on paper. I don't know what way they'll line up. They'll probably go horses for courses, as I'm sure Franco Smith will want. But I'm just not convinced by them. I think they'll win this at home. But I'm just not convinced by them. And the same sentiment almost across the board can be shared for the Stormers. Like I look at their backline as well, and you think of Leibach, and obviously what a player Manny Leibach is when he turns it on. You got the likes of Sasha and Gomazalu has had an unbelievable season, for instance. You've got that outside backline with Zass and with Angela Davids and Damien Willems, Warklant. There's wonderful players there. And they've got great pack. Daimani, Evan Roos, guys like Nitek Fausha and Franz Malherbe on the tight side. They've got Brock Harris is still there. Dion Free is out. He's injured. He's sidelined. They've got a great squad. And I think if John Dobson is as good of a man manager as we assume he is, which it seems like he is, I think he'll have these guys thinking, do you know what? You're every bit as good as these guys. Some of you played them in the World Cup and you wipe the floor with them and you can do this again. And I think that mental, can I call it a fight? I'm not sure if I can call it a fight, but that mental battle is going to be one to look out for. Just flicking it up here, like to see if there's anyone that I've missed. Ruben Van Heerden and Salman Moore, really good second row pairing for Stormers. That's who they had out last week. Herschel Yantes at 9. Dan Duplessis, very solid 12. Sasha Feinberg and Gomazalu, I've mentioned. Suleiman Hartzenberg has been decent, but like even you look at the bench they had last week, Joseph Dweba, Brock Harris, Franz Malherbe, Andre Smith, Ben Loader, formerly of London Irish. They have depth. They've got a great squad. They really, really do. Will the travel affect them? I think it might. Like it's their first week up north. They played 7 days ago against the Lions. That one game went down to the wire in Cape Town. They're going to need to be mentally on it, and they're going to need to have been mentally on it since Monday because of the travel. And we probably underestimate how important that, never letting it get to you is like you're 24 hours in the sky. You can never let it get to you. The fact that you have to do so much travel. They're coming in under the radar. There's no doubt about that. The Stormers, they've been there, they've done that, they've won knockout games. They haven't won a knockout game on the road though. And that kind of holds them back for me. I'm not sure if they can take it. I think there's great flash. There's a great team there. There's great individuals there. I'm not sure if I can just trust them just very yet. How I see it going, I think Glasgow, in their fashion, I think they will try and take on the Stormers up front because that's what they've been best at. They are going to try and work their way upfield by getting penalties. They don't kick trees. They'll go to the corner. They've got one of the best mauls, not just in the league, but in Europe, which Johnny Matthews um made the most of it. His 14 tries this season. I think it's 14. And that's how I see them going for it. I expect them to make a fast start. I expect them to hit the ground early. It's what Glasgow do, especially at home. They look to get that crowd on side. They look to get, in your face, be aggressive, be physical. But can you do that to the Stormers? You know? Or is there an element of, do you have to box clever? Do they have to play, with even more kick volume? Do they try and hold on to the ball a little bit more? Like, how do they get that attack going early on in this one? I can see Glasgow being 15 points up, after 20 minutes, just as easily as I can see them kind of punching themselves in the face and falling behind, because that's what we've seen last year. And if you're going to judge the Stormers and the fact that we've never seen them in a away knockout game, you have to judge Glasgow by the fact that they had a home knockout game last year and fell 14-0 behind. And they were in a Challenge Cup final against Toulon, where they fell, I think it was like 15 points behind at halftime or something like that. And that's makes it finely balanced. I think the Stormers are in more than a fighting chance. I think all four away sides have at least some chance of getting a result. The Stormers probably the most so. If it comes down to individual brilliance, I think the Stormers will win because that fast 4G surface, it absolutely could, especially on a dry night if it's dry. I think if it comes down to the better system and sticking to a script, I think it'll be Glasgow, and with the home advantage as well. Chris Busby taking charge of this one. I hope it goes well for him as an Irish referee, of course. But I would just lean towards Glasgow to get the job done in this one. I don't know, maybe 5 points, I think, is what I have it down at the end. We'll move on to Pretoria now because obviously we've so much to get to. We still have the Munster game to cover yet. But Jake White's Vodacom Bulls against Marco Bortolami's Benetton. Like, realistically, this is the game that most people are going to look at and say, oh, the Bulls should win this handily. They've scored the most points in the league. They've got a pretty good defense. They've been brilliant in Pretoria. Yeah, they lost to Munster, but they've wiped the floor with absolutely everyone else that has come there. Like, is there any reason to suggest the Bulls don't win this? Yes and no. I think yes, insofar as they have an ability to get in their own way. We've seen in the first half against the Sharks. My goodness, I have never seen a team look so bad with such good possession. They had unbelievable chances, handling errors left, right, and center, silly penalties lost left, right, and center. It would have been funny if it wasn't for the fact that Munster were kind of hoping that the Bulls would get the job done and finish in second. But I suppose that's sport in a nutshell in and of itself. Bennett, on the other hand, can they go on the road and get a result? Their results, like the Ospreys, who face Munster, their away form isn't exactly anything spectacular, and it's not what they're known for. They've been superb at home. One of the best home teams in the league, but away from home, going to South Africa, I'm not sure if they can get this done. And at that altitude, I don't know. I really don't know. I think a lot of where the Bulls, a lot of what we can take from the Bulls and where they can win this competition will come this week as well. There's a chance the Bulls should take their eye off the ball and they make this very difficult for themselves, and Benetton grow into it as they kind of smell blood in a way that an underdog would. But at the same time, if the Bulls are clinical, very early on. We've seen that so often as well this season. Probably the one thing that stood out from Munster's win was they just kept with them that first half, never let the game fade away. And then when it came into the second half and Munster had that bench, they were able to unleash it. Benetton don't have that, but Benetton have a good squad. I think that Benetton are one of the better coach teams. Do they have the belief in themselves that they can go down there? Will they feel like they're already in plus territory more than Ulster or the Ospreys would have? I think, yeah, there's that side of things as well, unfortunately. I'd back the Bulls to win. I'd back the Bulls to win quite comfortably in this one. It's on TG Car on Saturday afternoon if anyone wants to watch it. And of course, all games on Premier Sports. But surely the Bulls can't let this slip. Like, you look at that back line of, they've got, okay, Houston isn't the most exciting player in the world, but Kane and Moody, Curtly Arnsa, Willie LaRue, even someone like David Creel, they've got wonderful backs. They've got the likes of Aylward Grow and Marcel Coetzee, Aker van der Merwe, Bjorn Grobler in the pack. There's nothing. There's no reason to suggest Benetton should win this, really. In the same way that there's no reason to suggest the Bulls won't be in a final. Considering they've got a home final or home quarter final and semi final, you've got to imagine it's there for them. You really do. And I think this is where Jake White is going to be drumming it into his players. Now's your chance. Now's your chance. Like, Jake White hasn't got this far in rugby by accident. He knows how to get a squad going. I think he will. And I think the Bulls will have the same attitude they kind of had against, say, Leon in the Champions Cup, where, they'll kind of look at them and say, these aren't the games we lose. These are the games we win handy. We go out, we throw the ball around, we'll get things going, we'll do the job in the same way they've done all season. They haven't scored the most points in the league for no reason, just because they play ground and pound rugby, even if on paper it might look like they do. And I think they will win easily. Altitude will play a part, travel will play a part, belief will play a part as well. Like, this is a serious contender against a team who aren't judged to be a contender by pretty much anyone. Finally, then, to Thomond Park. If you're listening to this on Friday, it's tonight. If you're listening to this on Saturday, and if Munster have lost, I have already in hibernation. But this is the first seed Munster against the 8th seed Ospreys in Limerick. From Munster, no slip-ups are allowed here. It is win. It is get to the semi-final. It is just, even to the element of, like, win. Don't make it difficult for yourself in any way. Stop this Kings of the Hard Way stuff for 1 week. I think for the Ospreys, it's absolutely a free hit. I think Toby Booth is going to be nailing into them all week. We've stayed with them when we've had them in the Liberty Stadium. We stayed with Ulster. We got a result. They'll will they fancy their chances? They will and they won't. I think they'll look at it and say it's a very tough task. We have to be at our very, very best to get a result here in Thomond Park. But they can. They're a good team. They're a sticky team. They kick smartly. They've got a very good set piece led by Nicky Smith at loose head prop. I think he's going to be hugely important for them. They do have some decent backs. Keelan Giles an absolute speedster, especially if it's a dry night, as is promised. But, like, Munster can't lose this game. They just can't. They had their slip up last week. Last week can be their slip up as far as they're concerned, by the fact that they were, what was it, 10 points behind or 13 points behind at one stage in Thomond Park. Munster have injuries. I think, we discussed on the Red Army podcast this week. If you want to check that out, Red Army podcast on all good podcast platforms, about Munster not having a 6-2 split because Thomas Ahern and Joey Carberry are injured. Will that change things? It shouldn't. Like, that's the thing. It shouldn't be a defining factor in a game like this. I think Munster should just get the job done. I have a bit of concern, of course I do, because Ospreys don't have pressure on them. Munster do. Munster, it's final or nothing. It's defending your crown or nothing from first place, really. Considering, the trophy will go through Limerick and all that. And the fact that you could play a team in a final who's after travelling north, on that kind of week's notice. For Munster, what to look out for. Like Gavin Coombs and John Hodner are back in the team, as is Antoine Frisch. So I think Munster are going to attack this game from the off. I don't think we're going to see this high kick volume game that we've seen in the opening halves of late. Think of the South African trip, you think of the Connacht game, you think of the Ulster game, the Edinburgh game as well, in that final block of games. So I think for Munster, yes, what they did against the Ospreys last time, where they kind of just they kicked long, they gave Ospreys possession, they made Ospreys play. They might try and do that. Don't get me wrong, they might. But I look at how that team is made up, and I look at the fact that Kendall and O'Donoghue drop out for Hodner and Coombs. I look at the fact that Frisch is back in at 13, with Sean O'Brien at 12. Yeah, they've got Jaeger on the bench. Jimmer Barron is back on the bench. Brilliant to see him back. But I think this is a Munster team. They're going to go all guns blazing. It could be more akin to what we've seen at the start of the season, where they're going to trust their attack. And their attack has been good in recent weeks. I think the fact that they've added more of a kicking game, and people will say, oh, more game management, game management, mate, as if it's some sort of important thing. But I think they'll try and attack the Ospreys. I think they'll try and. I think the aim for me, from in my head, is Munster can score 3 tries in that first half. And the reason I think of that is, are the Ospreys going to be able to go 3, 6, 9, 16 to stay in touch? I'm not sure if they are. The Ospreys don't score a huge amount of tries. Munster, to their credit, have a brilliant defence, best defence in the league for the second year running in terms of points allowed and tries allowed. So, yeah, I'd just be leaning, well, not just leaning towards Munster. I'd be leaning towards Munster, not just get the job done, but I think if they perform and if they meet expectations in the way that probably haven't done in Thomond Park in a lot of games this season, then I think they could have this game done by the hour mark. Otherwise, if they try and allow it to be a sticky game, and if they go back to that heavy kicking game against the Ospreys and make them play, the Ospreys will be, hanging on by their fingernails, coming into that second half, coming into that final quarter. It's really interesting. The weather's promised fine. Is that going to be a factor? Are Munster going to take confidence from how they played last week? That second half, unbelievable attacking display. I think you'd be foolish not to take some confidence from it. But the Ospreys are tough. The Ospreys are a tough team to break down. So I have Munster winning that one by about 12 points, I think. Depends on how the first half goes, as you can imagine. If the Bulls win comfortably, 25-point win, maybe more, maybe not as much, but I think they'll win that pretty easily. I have Leinster by 7, Glasgow by 5. They're the 2 close ones. I'll miss those 2 games. I'll be working on Saturday. But I think they're the ones to watch, really. Munster could well win by more. Munster could win by less. Any of these games could realistically go either way. But this is the way I am leaning. We'll leave it at that for today, though, folks. Thank you so much for joining me as we look ahead to what promises to be an unbelievable weekend of rugby. If you are down in Thomond Park, if you're listening to this on Friday, I might see you down there. If you're heading to Dublin, to Pretoria, or to Glasgow, I hope you enjoy it and hope your team gets the win, be it home team or away team. I'll be back on Sunday with a recap show with a great panel looking back on Munster Ospreys, Bulls, Benetton, Leinster Ulster, and Glasgow Stormers. And then it'll be myself back again next week to preview the 2 semi-finals. If you do like what you see or hear, please do subscribe, leave a review, tell a friend, share it on, whatever if you prefer. Why not drop a comment down if you are watching on YouTube with your predictions? But for now, until next time, and until Sunday, take it easy.